Hey there, YouTube. Baylor here, outstanding in my field. Today I want to talk about silent cards. Looking to make a ranking list of all of the silent cards. I guess 72 of them, as we are excluding Neutralize, Strike, Defend, and Survivor. No, 71 of them then. And I want to rank these cards kind of on a list of how frequently, when I see them, do I take them? That's not to say that a higher ranked card is necessarily better than a lower ranked card, and of course everything in Spire is context sensitive, but to rank them in this way is kind of a question of how strongly should you be considering each of these cards as you see them, or how many bonuses does a card need to be worth considering. By the way, if you like this video, please give me a like and let me know in the comments below what your favorite silent card is. What is the one silent card you'll take over anything else? Without further ado, let's start with the commons here. Flying Knee, I think, is a perfectly passable damage common. It doesn't really feel like it helps you out that much in the late game, but it does a little bit of damage, and the additional energy can be, you know, quite relevant when you're in Act 3 or 4, so it's alright. I wouldn't call it in the better half of the common attacks, though. Outmaneuver might be my least favorite silent card. No, not my least favorite silent card, my least favorite silent common. I'm gonna put that all the way in the bottom tier. The problem with Outmaneuver is that it doesn't do anything the turn that you play it. You're not guaranteed to draw cards on the next turn in order to be able to use that energy. And for one card, you're only gaining one energy without the upgrade. Now, upgraded Outmaneuver is a little bit better. I'd put Outmaneuver in C or even B, depending on the deck, but it's just, most of the time, not a card you want. Cloak and Dagger used to be one of the better Shiv cards, but these days I think it's actually a relatively poor common. As far as Shiv cards go, it just doesn't give you very many Shivs, and while it provides a little bit of block, there's definitely better block options for silence, so I don't have a hugely high opinion of Cloak and Dagger either. Now, Blade Dance, giving you 3 or upgraded 4 Shivs, that's definitely a high-ranking card these days. 12 base damage on its own, which is excellent, basically, compared to any other silent attack. And it scales so very, very well with so many of the relics that you can find. You know, give me a Shuriken, give me a Kunai, give me an Ornamental Fan, and we're having a really good time with the Blade Dance. So Blade Dance is a very frequent, pretty good pick, but I think it really suffers against some of the late game bosses, particularly if you're going for a heart run, or particularly if you're playing on a 20. Blade Dance struggles a lot against the Time Eater, it struggles a lot against the heart. If you don't have the right relics, I don't think it's particularly spectacular, so I think it's a very good card, but not a no-brainer yes card, so I'll put it in A. I think the only silent common that deserves an S, at least from me, and that is Piercing Wail. This card is so much block for 1 energy. Only in certain fights, sure, but most of the fights, particularly throughout the entire later half of the game, Act 2, Act 3, and Act 4. Piercing Wail is a spectacular card that can just block for 90 against Heart, block for 50 against Reptomancer, block for 18 in a huge variety of situations. The upgrade on it doesn't matter too much either. Most of the time, Piercing Wail does what it does without needing an upgrade, which makes it all the better. Prepared. Draw 1, discard 1 on its own. Actually a detrimental card. You're effectively just discarding one of the cards in your hand, and the draw 1 isn't really helping you because you've added an additional card to the deck. But Prepared has a pretty good upgrade to it, and Prepared works wonderfully as an enabler for Silent's myriad of discard synergies. So I have to at least give it a C tier. I don't think it's a bottom tier card. And if you can get it upgraded for free, it's pretty dang good. How do I feel about Dodge and Roll these days? Dodge and Roll is Silent's only multi-dexterity scaling card. That is to say, this card gains a benefit from dexterity multiple times, so it's really good with footwork, really good with the oddly smooth stone, very good with an upgrade too. And I think Dodge and Roll does have a pretty good upgrade. I think I'm gonna ultimately land on B tier for this card. I don't often like taking it in the early game, but I think it's a just really solid card numerically overall. It's valued in such a way that Frail minimally impacts this, only giving you -1 block on both of the turns, which makes it particularly useful in Act 2, and as noted, scales really wonderfully with dexterity. So I think a B tier is probably where I'm gonna put it, which is going to be where Backflip ends up too. Backflip's pretty solid. 5 block, 2 card draw. I really wish that Backflip upgraded for more draw rather than for more block. It ends up being kind of 2 mediocre effects stapled together, but 2 mediocre effects stapled together is pretty good, actually. How about Deadly Poison? It's pretty hard for me to not just rank all of Poison as high tier in general for Silent. I think there's so many different things that Poison ends up being an easy answer to. Poison is essentially Silent's answer to bosses collectively. Deadly Poison is one of the only 1 energy poison cards. I don't think I can, in good conscience, put it in A tier here. I don't think it's quite consistently good enough. It is nice and targeted. The upgrade is decent at +2 Poison, but not massive. I think I'll put it in B. Yeah, I think B feels right. Probably where I'm going to put Poison Stab as well is also in B tier for being pretty good upfront damage, having a notably helpful upgrade, and for getting you into Poison in general. These are probably some of the worst 2 of the Poison cards, all things considered. How about Dagger Throw? Dagger Throw is also not an attack I take a whole lot, but it does branch into Silence Discard, and I think that makes it a pretty good common. I'll also put Dagger Throw, I think, in B tier, whereas Quick Slash ends up in C tier, even though it has a very similar effect to the Dagger Throw. Because Quick Slash does not let you discard a card, it does not combo with later things that you might be looking to scale to with your Silent deck. You might want to be picking up Tacticians or Reflexes later, for example, or find a Tough Bandages or Tingsha. The Dagger Throw works with those, the Quick Slash does not. Upgraded, they both do 12 damage. Comparatively, I think Slice is a pretty solid common. 0 cost, now that they buffed it to deal 6 rather than deal 5, it just feels quite good in Act 1, and still remains relevant damage in the late game, as well as being a nice way to get attack spam kind of stuff going. How about Dagger Spray? One of Silent's only AoE cards, Dagger Spray is a relatively mediocre card with a really good upgrade. Both hits get +2, so it's 12 damage to all enemies with an upgrade. I think that's good. Where's Sneaky Strike these days? Sneaky Strike is one of Silent's best damage commons. I think that also ends up in B. Man, where are the A-tier commons? Acrobatics is an A-tier common, that's for sure. Draw 3, discard 1. Very, very useful. Basically throughout all of the game. Once you've got your Silent on 4 energy, being able to draw more cards becomes one of the most important things to do. And the more 0 cost cards you incorporate, the more drawing cards becomes important to do. The order within a rank is not important here, no. Bane, I think Bane Plus is an A tier card. Bane Regular, I can't justifiably give it A tier. And following my tiering philosophy here of how often you take it when you see it, I think Bane might even be down in C tier, just because of how infrequently you already have the poison established to make Bane takeable. And that really is Bane's problem, is that if you cannot get its condition to activate, it's really just not that good. That said, if you can make Bane work, it's one of Silent's best common attacks, or best attacks period, hitting just about as hard as Glass Knife, but without losing the damage. If you've got, say, the Twisted Funnel, or any kind of bottled poison card, then Bane becomes incredible. But I really feel like Bane needs at least 2 other poison cards to feel comfortable, which means most of the time when you're seeing Bane, you're skipping it. I think Sucker Punch is also going to end up in C tier. It's one of Silent's lowest damage commons. It is notably a source of weaken, which is very, very valuable. However, Silent has so many other better sources of weaken that I find that often the Sucker Punch ends up irrelevant. This is also how I feel about the Neutralize upgrade about half the time, is that ultimately you end up picking up a Crippling Cloud or a Leg Sweep or a Malaise, and the Sucker Punch that you picked up starts doing nothing. That said, it's really nice to have an attack that can strip a layer of artifact from enemies, so it can fit in quite nicely with a poison or defensively oriented deck in general. It's also got a pretty good upgrade. It gains +2 damage and +1 turn of weak, so if you're going to take a Sucker Punch, I highly recommend upgrading it. Lastly, Deflect, I think I'm also going to put down in C tier, although I do appreciate Deflect's ability to be 0 cost block. If you don't have any dexterity, the number on Deflect really just isn't high enough, and it does require an upgrade or some other boost in order to feel relevant. That said, picking a Deflect and upgrading it is a really nice way to get some serious oomph in your block. I feel pretty comfortable with these rankings for the commons, mostly B and C tier. I'm not a huge fan of Silent's common pool in general, but she does alright, especially since some of these got upgraded. Let's talk uncommons now. We're going to see a lot more of the high and the low tiers both here. Starting with Blur. I think this is one of Silent's best block cards. Better than Backflip, even. Blur is only 5 block, not a whole lot on its own, but lets you retain any unused block to the next turn, and there's plenty of ways for that to be great. Doubly so if you can retain this card in any fashion. So Blur is great. How about Bouncing Flask? Bouncing Flask says apply 3 poison to a random enemy 3 times. In terms of poison per card, no card applies as much poison as Bouncing Flask does outright. It's the best single target poison card Silent has. That's how I tend to think of it. And that is, I think, how you should think of it as well, as a single target poison card. In any fight with multiple enemies, this card is dramatically reduced in effectiveness because you don't know where the poison's going, and each individual enemy loses 1 poison per turn. But where Bouncing Flask really shines is its ability to hit the same target 3 times. The Heart, Hexaghost, Guardian, any Act 2 boss in general, and can be quite effective against the Summoner-style enemies, Collector and Grim Leader, if you can wipe the minions off the field first. It's also a card that can strip 3 or 4 layers of artifact with 1 play, so it's incredible against the Spheric Guardian, who's normally resilient to poison. It's incredible against Spire, Spear, and Shield. It's incredible for removing artifact from the Heart, from Donu and Deka, from anything. How about Calculated Gamble? Calculated Gamble is, I think, one of Silent's best draw cards. It also is crazy good with discard synergy, allowing you to discard basically more cards than any other card in the Silent pool. It's a 0-cost card, and it upgrades to stay around. I think Calculated Gamble is an S-tier card. With the right relics, you can actually build a deck around this thing. And I've seen some particularly silly Runic Pyramid plus Calculated Gamble plus Tingsha decks that were just filthy. So I'm going to put that way up in S tier because it's almost always the case that you'd like to have one of these as one of the cards in your hand so that you can gamble away whatever you don't want to play to get new stuff. It's great card draw, and it's a card that works with so many of the other things that Silent does. How about Backstab? Free turn 1 damage. I really like Backstab. 1 or 2 copies fit in almost any Silent deck, and that's because of her Ring of the Snake, giving her bonus cards on turn 1. A couple of Backstabs can make so many of the normal encounters in the game just so trivial. I've even seen Silent decks that get so much turn 1 damage guaranteed that they're able to kill every normal fight on turn 1, and then the entire rest of the deck is built towards killing bosses because nothing else survives. Pretty cool. Backstab is definitely one of the cards that lets you do that. How do I feel about Accuracy? Accuracy is hard to rank here. We kind of have to evaluate Shivs as a whole. My biggest beef with Accuracy, I think it's quite good, especially now that it's been buffed, right? 4 or 6 additional damage on Shivs, doubling the damage output of Shivs, making Blade Dance instantly into a deal 40 damage card if they're both upgraded. That's an insane boost in damage, but my biggest beef with Accuracy is that it doesn't add any damage to your starting deck. You can't really take this card on floor 1 because you don't start with any Shivs and you're not guaranteed to find any Shivs. And I think that's going to keep it out of A tier, put it into B tier. If you have Shivs, Accuracy is really good now, but you have to have the Shivs first or it's not worth taking. How about Caltrops? Caltrops are one of those 1-card solution cards we talked about. Caltrops can single-handedly fix your damage output against Heart. We actually saw that quite recently with our Silent run yesterday. But Caltrops requires your enemy to hit you, and it doesn't work very well in all the fights, being notably terrible against Giant Head, not particularly helpful against Awakened One. As a damage power, I rate it fairly highly, but I don't think you often take it. It doesn't quite feel right to put in C tier, but it's definitely not an A tier card, and it's very much a one of sort of deal. I don't usually advocate for multiple copies of Caltrops, although it can work if you've got the block game down. I'm going to put that in B as a kind of a compromise. It really does feel like an A or C deal to me, but we'll settle in B tier. How about Catalyst? Now, Catalyst is the ultimate 1-card solution. Catalyst doubles or upgraded triples the poison an enemy has. And I think that does need to be all the way up in S tier. And the reason for this is that Catalyst is forbidden scaling. It's multiplicative scaling. And that means that Catalyst, not only is Catalyst a busted powerful card if you have any poison, but as you get more of them, each one is stronger and stronger than the last. And in a game that has access to the ability to duplicate your cards at times, whether that be from a burst or a nightmare or making a real second copy of it with a Dolly's Mirror, or by using a duplication potion, or whatever. If you can multiply your one copy of Catalyst in any way, it's going to be game-breaking. One Catalyst can do 50 poison, but then the next one does 150, and then the third one does 20 million, or whatever. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I think it speaks to just how strong Catalyst is that one copy of Catalyst in a 40-card deck can be your entire plan for fighting hard, at least damage-wise. The rest of it is going to be like Piercing Wail. And that's why these, especially Catalyst and Piercing Wail, I've had so many silent decks beat Heart just because of Piercing Wail and Catalyst. All right, Choke. Starts with a C. I think C tier feels about right. Doesn't quite feel right to put it in D tier, but it's definitely a stinker. Deals 12 damage whenever you play a card. This turn, the enemy loses 3 health. As far as 2 energy attacks go, it's certainly not the greatest for the silent. You're more likely to be happy with a dash or a predator. That said, if you can spam a lot of cards, Choke actually scales pretty hilariously, comboing really well with Blade Dance in particular, but also quite a few other cards, including some of the colorless cards, and various potions too. Choke with Shiv Potion is quite a bit of bonus damage, just as an example. Concentrate. As far as energy generating cards go, I like Concentrate more than I like Outmaneuver, but only barely. Concentrate's problem is that giving you energy and discarding cards from your hand usually run contrary to one another, because if you discard all the cards in your hand, you no longer have anything to spend your energy on. In order then to make the Concentrate work, you have to get lots of card draw at the same time. We're talking multiple acrobatics. We're talking well-laid plans, we're talking expertise, we're talking many backflips, or an unceasing top. But you need truly an obnoxious amount of card draw for Concentrate to work really well. I think it's quite rare that I want it. That said, when it's good, it's really good. If you have enough card draw, this can be an infinite enabler. If you have enough card draw, it's ridiculously efficient, giving you 2 or... does Concentrate upgrade to discard 2 cards, gain 3 energy, or is it still 2 energy? I don't remember. And yes, works incredibly well with Reflex. Let's actually talk about Reflex. If discarded from your hand, Reflex draws 2 upgraded 3 cards. Used to be 1 or 2, and I thought the old Reflex was quite crap, but new Reflex is really good, giving you absolutely enormous card draw, and being like the big thing, I think, that enables silent discard to work. It essentially turns a discard effect into a draw positive effect, and that immediately can do very silly things with Prepared, very silly things with Calculated Gamble, obnoxious card draw with Acrobatics, and it lets you use the energy from Concentrate really effectively. Okay, it still upgrades to 2 energy. That's what I thought. Yeah, that's a weird card there. Also in A tier, Crippling Cloud. It's poison and weak and to all enemies. The upgrade on Crippling Cloud is absolutely filthy good. 3 more poison to all enemies. The only real problem with Crippling Cloud is that as a 2-cost card, you know, it's not the most numerically efficient thing to use on a single target. But in any multi-enemy fight, you want Crippling Cloud, and in most single-target fights, you're going to want the poison and the weak. So it becomes a card that's good almost all the time, and is really good some of the time. Also a very good card to duplicate, whether it be from a burst or a duplication potion or something. Gives you vibes of a worse Shockwave. I tend to think of Crippling Cloud as doing more damage output than the Shockwave does, and that's particularly true if you're able to multiply it. But it's true that it's a lot less weak than Shockwave is. Shockwave is really good. And yes, very efficient stripping of artifact. How about Dash? I think Dash is an incredible early game card. It does fall apart a little bit in the later game, but it's still one of Silent's more efficient blocks. I don't think it's quite right to put it in A tier, but we'll stick it in B. 10 damage, 10 block at the same time. It's heckin' good. Comparatively, I think Leg Sweep is the block card that gets A tier. Weaken in block. It's a little bit more block for 2 energy, and the upgrade is fantastic with more block and more weaken. A couple of leg sweeps can be pretty much single-handedly your late-game block plan. And even 1 leg sweep in Act 2 is very fantastic mitigation. Distraction, this one's going to be in D tier. I have a love for the random card generation stuff, the Infernal Blades, the White Noises of the world, but a random skill is completely unpredictable as to what you're going to get. You might get block, you might get poison, you might get card draw, or you might get a reflex or a tactician that don't do anything. There's just too many stinky skills in the silent card set for distraction to be relied upon to do anything at all. Sometimes it gives you a free nightmare, and that's pretty cool. And it does upgrade to 0 cost, which is worth at least kind of noting, but to trust this card with anything is to be invariably disappointed, I think. That's how I feel about it. That's how I feel about it. Endless Agony, meanwhile, we'll put that in B. It's good upfront damage, 2 0-cost exhausting cards, great with Ninja Relics, very good with Dead Branch, and the fact that it exhausts and you can just have it get out of the deck can actually be quite useful against bosses, particularly like against Time Eater. You don't want to have this card coming back multiple times. Generally speaking, the fact that it duplicates itself is not all that relevant. I do agree that distraction can be a piece of a low energy deck, but it's tough. The same can be said of setup, which I'm also going to put in D tier. If it's got a free upgrade, yes, it can be a useful energy, right? Gaining you theoretically 3 energy, but still costs you 2 card draws, which is my big beef with setup, and often not doing anything until the turn after you play it. There's just too many layers of conditional for setup to feel good, which is not to say that it's never useful, just that it's almost never useful. How about all-out attack? Really good area effect damage, just really, really solid AoE damage, but with a notable downside, a random discard really messes with Silent in particular, who wants to be able to choose which cards she discards from her hand. Often looking to retain things with something like well-laid plans, or to be able to keep a particular card to play later. But it's just enough AoE damage to get you through Act 1 and Act 2, and still useful against Reptomancer that I can't put it in C tier despite its annoying effect. At least it's not Unload. Speaking of, no, we won't preemptively take Unload. Escape Plan. This one's hard to rate. I think Escape Plan is a perfectly fine addition to the deck most of the time. It's a 0-cost draw 1, which means it only has a disadvantage for you in a small handful of fights. Gremlin Knob, Time Eater, a Heart because of Beat of Death. And even in those fights, especially if you have any dexterity at all, Escape Plan is just a perfectly fine, sometimes pretty good, card to include. I've actually had 3 energy silent decks that are able to operate quite effectively off this. And because it's a relatively low-risk investment is how I tend to think of it, it's often just fine. But sometimes it really does hold you back, so it's not always something that you should take, which I think keeps it out of the A tier for me. The minimal risk means it's usually pretty good. You should at least think about it. Basically, anytime you're offered it. You know, if you've got a decent amount of skill density, or if you've got a decent amount of dexterity. Terrible, of course, with Snekawai, but many cards are. How about Eviscerate? I think Eviscerate is one of Silent's better attacks. Do I put it in A tier? I don't quite think so. I think that's yet another of the B tier cards. All of Silent is B tier, apparently. Eviscerate can be an absolutely filthy damage engine if you've got your discard going, but does require... Actually, well, I think this might even be close to A tier, actually. Ever since it got discounted by 1, the fact that you can just pay 3 energy to do 21 damage with Eviscerate is a very useful thing, and so even with no discard in your deck yet, it's something that you can afford to pick up, and makes other discard cards an easy inclusion. So I think it's reasonably either A or B. But I've got a few other cards headed for A tier. We'll leave it as it is. How about Expertise? Draw until you have 6 cards in hand. This is one of the more quote-unquote powerful draw cards for Silent, although I don't find myself taking it as often as I feel like I should. I wonder if that's a statement against me or against the card. I don't know. This is also a card that to me feels like it should be in either A or C tier, and again, I'm going to compromise with the middle here. Drawing until you have 6 in hand. It's not quite as no-brainer as Acrobatics, but it can be better. It doesn't have the complementary block of backflip, but again, can be more draw, and is a pretty potent upgrade as well, reliably drawing one more card. Expertise works particularly well with Concentrate and Prepared, or anything that lets you remove cards from your hand somehow. How about good old Footwork? Footwork is Silent's best defensive, like all-around kind of power, I feel. 2 or upgraded 3 dexterity scales Silent's fairly meager block cards so very well. Very notably, your defend cards, which are often one of the core parts of a Silent late game block deck, is still using those defends that she has. One, because she dislikes her strikes so much that she'll almost always preferentially remove them, and because very few cards in the Silent card pool block for more than 5 base anyway. So being able to get those cards to be more powerful in any way is incredibly valuable. Backstab is just great front load. That's right. It's great zero-cost front load, helping you through Act 1 and Act 2 in a really beautiful, really reliable way. And it combos really well with her starting relic. That's where my high rating for Backstab goes. If you trade away your starting relic to Niao, I think it drops probably all the way to C tier. Hey everyone. Did you know that you can now support me directly on YouTube by getting a channel membership? For as low as $5 a month, you'll get access to perks like custom badges and emojis to use in comments and discounts on the merch store, all while helping support me and this channel to do what I love every day. Just click the join button below to get started. Now back to the video. All right, Heel Hook. I really find myself disliking Heel Hook on Silent. She's got a lot of consistency for her weekend. I think I'll put it in C. There's some cool little things you can do, and theoretically, you can use Heel Hook to go infinite in the same way that you can Dropkick, but in practice, Silent has much easier ways to achieve that means anyway. It really doesn't do very much damage, and it's additionally conditional. I don't know. I don't think it's... Heel Hook Infinite is just... From the Infinite Master himself, Heel Hook Infinite is not a thing. Maybe that goes in D tier then. I don't like this card very much, and I almost never take it personally. Speaking of D-tier cards, is that where I put Riddle with Holes? I think it has to be. Riddle with Holes is one of the worst 2-cost attacks the Silent has. It can be cute if you give it strength. It can be cute with Envenom, providing poison. But overall, Riddle with Holes is bottom of the barrel when it comes to Silent damage. It is pretty cool with the boot, though, so keep that in mind. Flechettes, meanwhile, I think Flechettes can join the bevy of cards in B tier. It's quite conditional. You have to have lots of cards in hand, but Flechettes can be one of the best damage cards that exist for Silent. Or one of the best attack cards, rather. Striking for, 6 or even more times 7 or 8 or 9. Applying lots of, if you're looking for a card that hits multiple times, all the things that you want Riddle with Holes to be able to do, Flechettes can do, and it does better with the right support. But sometimes it does nothing. That's tough. How about Infinite Blades? I am a known Infinite Blades hater, but even I don't believe it belongs in D tier, I don't think. Actually, if I were to compare Riddle with Holes and Infinite Blades, I think I would say Infinite Blades is less frequently used than Riddle with Holes. Maybe I can put it in D tier. Of the Shiv cards, it's by far the worst, slowest way to get them. It takes you 4 turns after playing Infinite Blades to get the same number of Shivs as 1 Blade Dance. Right? You get 1 the turn you play it, 1 Shiv the turn after, the second Shiv 2 turns later, the final Shiv 3 turns later. 4 turns to do 1 Blade Dance is not fast at all. And you generally don't have the time to wait that long, when you could just draw the Blade Dance again and play it again. Infinite Blades can also run into annoying hand size problems. In certain circumstances, it penalizes you against the Time Eater and against the Awakened one. It can make it really difficult to stall in a fight. Problematic against Spikers, too. I'm not a fan. That said, it's not useless. I think in Act 1, if you're fighting Slime Boss, you should consider it as an option. And if you have a Dead Branch or any ninja-related relic, you should give it a thought. But most of the time I see this card, I'm totally ignoring it. Comparatively, Well-Laid Plans, I think, is a card I'm almost always looking for. This is going to go all the way up in the toppest of tiers at S, because of just how often Silent wants to be having access to Retain. No surprise to me that this card was nerfed from its original 0 cost to 1 cost. Just because there's so many cards in Silent's kit that are so powerful with access to retain. Notably, many of the others we're going to see in S tier. Piercing Wail, Catalyst, Calculated Gamble. These are all very good things in conjunction with the Well-Laid Plans, but of course also all of her block cards and many of her conditional damage cards. Stuff like Choke, stuff like Skewer, stuff like Finisher. Anything gets better with retain. Masterful Stab. 0 cost, deal 12. It's actually very, very good in the early game, but the later you get into the game, the worse Masterful Stab becomes, eventually being a real problem in the late game, unless you're able to really protect your health resource. And it is possible to have a Masterful Stab that just stays 0 cost through the whole heart fight. I'm just going to say that I've never seen it happen. Generally speaking, what Masterful Stab does is done better by Backstab. So I tend to think of Masterful Stab as something that's outclassed, but in a roguelite game where you don't get to choose from every single card that exists, only the 3 that are before you, it can certainly be a good option, so do consider it. I just don't think I end up taking it very often. How about Fumes? I think I used to rate Fumes up in A tier. These days I've come down a little bit, just because it's really not that much poison. That said, Fumes is poison every single turn, really good at removing artifact from enemies or being kind of an inevitable win condition against certain foes. I don't think I can, in good conscience, rate it higher than Caltrops, though. I mean, they're both here in the same tier. I wanted to put them together. Join forces, damage powers. You're all wonderful. That's a good way to think of it. Slow for Ascension 20 standards. Often you'll need a bonus to it. It can't be your only poison. So I like, for example, Fumes plus Bouncing Flask, Fumes plus a couple of deadly poisons can really get there, or even Fumes plus Envenom. But that's what's cool about Fumes. If it's your only poison, it'll get you there, unlike any other 1 poison card. It just takes a really long time. All right, how about Predator? I think Predator is one of the best, if not the best, attack card. Draw 2 next turn is an oddly desirable effect on a 2 cost, because you don't want to draw the 2 cards on the turn that you paid 2 energy, compared to Wheel Kick on Watcher. I don't think I can put it quite in A tier. There's really no attacks for Silent that feel like they belong in A tier, just because of how frequently Silent is getting her damage from non-attack sources, poison, caltrops, relics, you name it, but it's definitely a good one. Definitely a very, very good one. Skewer, meanwhile, I've come down quite a bit on Skewer. I used to be a huge fan, especially in Act 1. Since you're able to put multiple energy into it, the upgrade on Skewer becomes really impactful. So an upgraded Skewer in the early game really, really slaps. But it feels like now that many of Silent's other attack cards have been buffed, numerically, Skewer just kind of falls behind on the curve just a little bit. Just a little bit. And so it doesn't quite feel right to put in B tier with the other efficient attacks. You know, you'd rather pay the 2 energy to get the bonus draw from Predator. You'd rather do more damage with a Blade Dance than you would spending an energy on Skewer. Now, if you have an Ice Cream or a Necronomicon or any of the other kind of cool synergies, the Chemical X can make Skewer really good. Very good with Pen Nib as well. But it's awkward most of the time, which is definitely where I feel Tactician is. Awkward most of the time. I don't feel the Tactician's a D tier card. Well, maybe. I mean, it depends on how much discard you have, right? Often just outright a curse. If you can discard Tactician, you'll gain 1 or upgraded 2 energy. Used to consider this very similar to Reflex, but with the buff to Reflex, I think Reflex is by far the better card. It doesn't quite... I don't think it's quite right to put this in D tier, but I don't think Tactician ends up being ultimately all that useful most of the time, because you have slightly better ways to get that energy, again, most of the time. That said, especially upgraded, if you've got a lot of draw and a lot of discard, Tactician can be a huge enabler for either infinite combos or for just energy efficiency on a 3 energy deck. Could maybe consider it. I mean, depending on what your rest of the setup is, it might be in B tier. But I'd argue that most of the time, if you've got the kind of deck that wants a Tactician, you'd rather have a Reflex anyway. Now, Terror. Terror, I have a very high opinion of. I think Terror goes all the way up in A tier as it's the only source of vulnerable for Silent, and it's got a beautiful full combat duration, upgrades to 0 cost, which is very useful. I like to think of Tear as basically an enabler for the entirety of physical Silent. All of the attacks that this character has are just a little bit tepid on their own, but if you can scale them in any way, shape, or form, they become a serious way to get through the game. And Terror is the best, easiest, and most reliable way to start with doing physical damage on the Silent. It buffs all shivs, it buffs all the other attacks. I mean, if you look at the other cards in this list that Terror improves, you'll find it's like more than half of them. I think it's a very, very good pickup. Only something that you end up wanting one copy of usually, and not something that you always want. But most of the time, I'm very, very happy with Terror. I think it's a very good floor 1 pickup in particular because it improves your starting deck dramatically. All right, we're down to just the rare cards now. Let's talk. Tools the Trade. I think this is one of the better draw and discard ones. Also, notably, a power that upgrades to 0 cost. I don't think it's quite A tier though. I generally speaking, I have a hard time putting any power that does nothing on the turn you play it into a high tier. Hilariously, I say that as well. A plans as S tier. I'm going to put it in B. It takes an additional turn to counteract the card that it is, right? Costs you 1 card to include in the deck. Only draws you 1 card at the turn after you play it. So 2 turns after you play it, you're seeing 1 more card. That's a bit slow. How about Adrenaline? Adrenaline, if we're again using the principle that how often do you take this card when you see it, Adrenaline goes up in the toppest of tiers. I don't think it's the best or most powerful Silent card at all, but it's almost always a good inclusion in a deck, giving you essentially free energy, free card draw, and these properties only tend to get better with relics. You know, add Dead Branch, add Letter Opener, add an upgrade to it and it's more energy, add what have you. That said, whenever you're looking at Adrenaline, you might also be looking at other rare cards, and you should definitely consider what are those other rare cards are, because they could be incredibly good. Always never skip an Adrenaline. Ink Bottle, yes, great example of a relic that makes it better. How about Unload? Unload is... I'm sorry, Unload. You're a stinky card. Unload does pretty good damage for 1 energy, but then discards all non-attack cards in your hand. Unfortunately, that means both the ones that you want to discard, you know, statuses, curses, and you might not want to discard those, right? Discarding Dazed can be really annoying, but also discarding all of the skills that you might want to play after the Unload. Absolutely shuts down your ability to keep stuff with well-laid plans or with Pyramid. Can sometimes be really, really useful, but for the most part, it's because you don't have a lot of control over exactly what's getting discarded, it can be really problematic. And many times it just says discard everything in your hand. After Image, block per card. I think block per card is good, but it's just not quite enough. If After Image upgraded to 2 block per card, it would be A or even S tier, but I think as it is, it's B tier. It really feels like when I have an After Image, I want 2 in order to block properly. And needing 2 copies is a bit of an ask a lot of the time. That said, if you're doing Shiv things, After Image is fantastic block. All right, Wraith Form, you know it, you love it. Intangibility not every turn, but intangibility for 2 or upgraded 3 turns is a filthy thing to do. Wraith Form is one of those 1-card solutions we talked about, being essentially all of the block that you need for almost any fight, even the heart fight. Simply being invincible for a couple of turns can make all of the difference. And in order to make the Wraith Form particularly amazing, you need to have a damage plan during those invincibility turns. That's where the other S-tier card Catalyst tends to come in. One of the easiest ways to win a Slay the Spire run. For me, personally, combine these 2 cards. Catalyst and some poison, plus a Wraith Form, call it a day. You're done. How about 1,000 Cuts? I like 1,000 Cuts' AoE damage, but man is it expensive at 2 cost, and man does it not do very much damage without an upgrade. Unfortunately, for those reasons, 1,000 Cuts I think ends up in C tier. It's fine against Slime Boss. If you're playing a lot of cards, it can do really good damage, but it's just so hard to get it in play. It's just so hard to upgrade this card to make it do enough damage. If Thousand Cuts was a 1-cost card, I think I would feel much, much more strongly about it. I think it would be in B or maybe even A tier. But because it costs 2 and because it's so difficult to get into play, it just doesn't get there. That tends to be where Envenom falls as well, is a very similar problem. Because Envenom is a 2-cost power. You kind of have to stop playing most of the rest of your cards on the same turn. That said, Envenom works really well with attack spam, particularly notably good with Snecko's Skull, which kind of doubles its effects. Or with the colorless power Sadistic Nature, giving you bonus damage per debuff. It makes all of your attack cards remove artifact layers. And it does have an energy reduction upgrade. I think Envenom Plus ends up being maybe a tier higher. But like all things, everything's competing for an upgrade. And there are many ways to gain energy. Upgrading your Envenom is not my favorite way to gain energy. I'm much more likely to want to upgrade Malaise. Malaise is a very, very, very good defensive card. Not universally good, so I don't think I can quite put it in the S tier. But as an X-cost card, I love Malaise, permanently removing strength from enemies, which can shut down so many things, notably the bosses of Act 3, notably the Time Eater, notably the Heart, but any multi-attacking enemy in general. If you can generate a lot of energy, Outmaneuver actually works really well for this, by the way. Outmaneuver Malaise is a really fun combo, if you can get them to play nice. Works great with Chemical X, and has a juicy upgrade, making it apply 1 more energy worth of debuff. It's also a great target for good old card duplicator Nightmare. My opinion on Nightmare has waffled a little bit. In terms of... Nightmare is a really cool duplicator here. Often feels like overkill, is how I tend to feel about Nightmare. You're spending a lot of energy, 3 or even upgraded 2 cost, to get 3 additional copies, more copies than you probably want of 1 card, but boy does it do some really silly things if you can get it online. Single-handedly winning boss fights by duplicating Catalyst, duplicating Adrenaline, duplicating Wraith Form, duplicating Footwork, duplicating Afterimage, duplicating Accuracy. Any power, any exhausting card become incredible, incredible, incredible targets for the Nightmare, but it is a little bit slow, and so I tend to think that I would give a slightly higher rating to the Burst, which gives you instant duplication of 1 or with upgraded 2 skills, letting you burst a Catalyst for instant death, letting you burst your Bouncing Flask or Adrenaline or Crippling Cloud. The disadvantage that the Burst has compared to the Nightmare is that the Nightmare can target any card where the Burst cannot, but in practice, most of the things you want to duplicate in Silent are her skills. Speaking of really good skills to burst, Corpse Explosion's a really good skill to burst, one of the best poison cards, although numerically, in terms of poison per energy, Corpse Explosion is not that strong. What it is targeted poison, unlike Bouncing Flask. And of course, the effect where all the enemies explode is really nice too, enabling it to be a 1-card inclusion in almost any deck. Even if you don't have poison, the secondary effect of Corpse Explosion is very useful. Lastly, it removes 2 artifact from any enemy that it strikes, which is really useful as well. Only thing that keeps this out of S tier is the 2-cost price tag. How about Glass Knife? Very, very good damage. Glass Knife is why Unload is in D tier, because there's just a better, more damage, less nonsense, rare attack card for the Silent, and that's Glass Knife. 8 damage twice, upgraded 12 damage twice, a plus 8 damage upgrade for some insane reason. The fact that it decreases the damage each time you play it is almost irrelevant, because very few things will survive 2 Glass Knives. I really like Glass Knife. It does need that upgrade, though. It does need that upgrade. So, and for any situation where you're not looking for attack cards, the Glass Knife probably won't do that much for you. How about the other rare attack, Die. 13 damage to all enemies. It's the best area effect damage card Silent has, and I'm tempted to put it in A tier for that reason as well. A really good one-off, and it exhausts, meaning that you won't draw it again. But I don't know if it's quite enough damage for me to feel like A tier. It really feels like this is a B+ card to me, personally. And I think that's where I am going to put it, as B. Do I buy Glass Knife for 150 gold plus in a store? Only if I'm on, like, the first 5 floors. But I would pay full price for a Glass Knife if you know, if there wasn't a better relic to spend my money on in an early Act 1 shop. Do I do that in Act 2? Probably not. Probably not. All right, how about Grand Finale? I really love Grand Finale. I think this is a very powerful card, but that requires... No, you're not going to B tier, I'm sorry. I think it's a very powerful card that requires quite a bit of careful setup. You have to have no cards in your draw pile, which is very difficult to achieve without lots of card draw and retain. By my own philosophy of how often do I see this card and skip it, pretty often, but I do not think that this is a D tier card. Honestly, I would love to put this in A or even S tier, because when it works so well that absolutely nothing can survive. But most of the time when you see a finale, you're probably not in a position to take it. So I think I put it down here in the Lonely C tier. Not to say it's a bad card. If you can make it work, and you can do so without making any mistakes, which is another concern with Grand Finale. Anytime you fail to account for something that draws you a card or something that puts a card into your draw pile, for example, status cards being added, ink bottle happening, a drawdown debuff from the Time Eater, that's definitely happened to me, you're going to miss the Grand Finale. So it's a very powerful card that requires not only the correct deck, but also the correct play. It's just tough. It's just really tough. And that's also how I feel about Finisher, is unreliability on Finisher. Finisher can be very, very strong. It hits once per attack you've played previously on the turn. That can be a very, very devastatingly powerful card, especially in conjunction with Blade Dances, but I tend to find that the Finisher does not want to be drawn together with the Blade Dances. And unless you can make that happen, Finisher will betray you. Oh yeah, that was hiding in the rares there. Whoops, somehow missed that one. All right, just 5 to go. Bullet Time. One of the more powerful energy generators. I think I like it a little bit more than Concentrate and Tactician as an energy generator. It's a bit weird though. Essentially lets you play every other card in your hand for 3 or 2 cost. Where Bullet Time gets really good is if you can spend a couple of energy drawing cards with backflips or acrobatics, and then use Bullet Time to play an 8 or 9 card hand. Also incredible with a Snecko Eye to make your entire Snecko hand free. But most of the time, Bullet Time ends up being just a little bit too awkward because you're not getting enough cards in your hand, because you're not drawing enough. I've had a couple of good Bullet Times recently. I felt pretty good about the Bullet Time. And it's really good with Snecko. But Doppelganger. Doppelganger is a weird card. I think Doppelganger is like a C tier card with an A tier upgrade. That's how I tend to look at it. X cost, draw cards next turn, gain energy next turn, with the upgrade being 1 more of each. Doppelganger has an upgrade for +1 draw and +1 energy. That's better than almost any other card in the game. But the next turn nature of it is a little bit wonky. Also very, very powerful with the Chemical X Relic. If you get an upgrade on Doppelganger for free, or if you have Chemical X, I think it's fantastic, but most of the rest of the time, there are better ways to do what you want, and I think it's mostly outclassed by Adrenaline. Alchemize, 1 potion per combat. I think Alchemize is a fantastic card these days. And I like to put it in S tier, kind of amongst sorry, not S tier, A tier. A very high tier, but not an always take, as there's often a better rare being presented to you. But being able to stockpile potions, particularly notably finding Ghost in a Jar with Alchemize, can be a real run winner for the Silent. If you've got a potion belt, it can really help you fill that up. It lets you just be kind of aggressive with your resources in a fun way. And ever since the Boss Relic update, there's been just a lot of things that it interacts with in the Relic pool. So I think it's really good. I think it's really good to have 1, even 2 copies of Alchemize can be great if you've got a Potion Relic. But it's a way to gain more value from your combats, and I do like that quite a bit. If you're taking Alchemize over Adrenaline, a good deal. I think that's a very reasonable thing to be doing. It's got some real power. Phantasmal Killer. This got an energy buff somewhat recently. I actually quite like the card these days. It's definitely up there as a way to scale silence attacks, but I think it's a little bit more awkward than Terror. I don't think I can justifiably put it in the same tier as Terror, because it really does feel like a slightly worse Terror in a lot of ways. Although it's numerically stronger, it does require more finagling, so to speak. I think that means B tier feels about right for the new Phantasmal Killer. Old 2-cost Phantasmal Killer would have been C or D tier, but new Phantasmal at a much more reasonable price of B, or upgraded is 0 cost, might even be A tier. Still needs a lot of support. It's not a one-card solution for anything. All right, lastly, Storm of Steel. I saved the, well, in this case, last might also be worst. Storm of Steel discards your entire hand, giving you 1 Shiv per card. Discarded. The fundamental problem with Storm of Steel, strikes do more damage than Shivs. So to discard a strike to gain a Shiv is a bad deal as long as you can pay the energy for the strike. Storm of Steel, therefore, needs a lot of help to be worthwhile putting into the deck. Dead Branch is the one single relic that takes Storm of Steel out of the D tier and makes it a really good card to include. Tough Bandages or Tingsha can get you most of the way there as well. But if you don't have some kind of bonus piggybacking off of what Storm of Steel does, do not take the Storm of Steel. Take a Blade Dance, take a Cloak and Dagger, but don't take a Storm of Steel. And that's it. Hey there. If you enjoyed that video, watch this one next. And before you go, join us on Twitch and watch live. I'm there 5 days a week playing Slay the Spire, answering questions, and chilling with the community. Click the link in the description to follow right now. Ta-ta for now.